My name is Martha Cole, and at 62 years old, I thought I had already survived the worst a mother could ever endure. Life had taken my husband early, taken my health piece by piece, and taken every ounce of youth I once had. But nothing, absolutely nothing, cut as deeply as what my daughter did to me on Mother's Day. Rachel's house smelled like lemon polish and warm pastries when I stepped inside, the kind of scent you'd expect from a family gathering, not a battlefield. I had come holding a quilt I'd sewn from scraps of the kids' old clothes, Evan's first flannel pajama top, Daniel's worn-out jeans, little pieces of a life I had poured myself into. My fingers brushed the stitching as if touching those memories could steady me. I told myself this invitation meant something had shifted. Maybe she was finally ready to talk. Maybe the years of distance were softening. Maybe I still mattered. But the moment she took the quilt from my hands, hope slid right out of me. She held it up between two fingers, polite, almost delicate, and then dropped it. It fell in a slow curl to the floor, landing in the quiet center of the dining room like a wounded thing. Moms who abandon their kids don't deserve to be called moms, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice the air. Her friends, her husband, even the neighbors she'd invited to show off her new kitchen, they all heard it. And they all looked at me with a kind of stunned politeness, as if waiting to see if I'd break down or explode. I didn't do either. I just stood there, rooted to the hardwood floor, every bone in my body humming with disbelief. I hadn't abandoned her. I had bent my entire life around raising her. I had worked until my hands cracked and my back ached. I had given her the very things I went without. But the version of me she painted, the villain she wanted them to see, left no room for truth. Before I could speak, a chair scraped back. Evan stood up so abruptly his fork clattered against the plate. His voice trembled, but the words didn't stutter. "That's not true," he said. "Grandma never abandoned anyone. You're the one who left." Rachel's eyes widened. The room went silent again, but this time the weight shifted off me and landed squarely on her. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, my grandson defending me against his own mother, was the doorway back into a past I'd tried to carry quietly. A past Rachel had spent years rewriting. And now, whether any of us wanted it or not, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. I was 27 when my life split open in a way I never saw coming. It was a gray February afternoon, the kind where winter has worn itself out but refuses to leave. I had just put a pot of soup on the stove when a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, hats in hand, and the moment I saw their faces, I knew something terrible had happened. They told me my husband, Tom, had been killed in a construction accident. Just like that, one sentence, one breath, and the world I'd built around our little family collapsed. Daniel was 6, old enough to understand that Daddy isn't coming home meant forever. He cried into my coat, clutching the fabric like it could hold him together. Rachel was only 3, too young to grasp the finality of death. For weeks she toddled around asking when her father would come back from the big job. Every time she asked, something cracked inside me, but I did my crying in the laundry room where no one could see. After the funeral, the bills began to pile up. I took the first job I could get, a sewing position at a small factory downtown, then another cleaning offices at night. I'd leave the house before sunrise and return long after the kids were asleep. I tried to be 2 parents at once, but no matter how hard I worked, it still felt like I was failing someone every hour of the day. Daniel grew up faster than any child should. He'd fold laundry without being asked, help Rachel with her shoes, watch me with this worried look that didn't belong on a boy his age. Rachel, on the other hand, learned something different. She learned to pay attention to what other kids had: new sneakers, store-bought lunches, sparkly backpacks, and she learned to see what we didn't have. One afternoon in elementary school, she came home furious. A classmate had teased her for wearing the same coat 2 years in a row. She slammed her bedroom door and refused to come out. When she finally did, she said something I've never forgotten. "Why can't you be like other moms?" Her voice was small, but the sting was sharp. I told her I was doing my best, but the truth was, she didn't want my best. She wanted a life I couldn't give her. As she got older, the divide between us widened. Rachel grew determined to escape the neighborhood we lived in, the paycheck-to-paycheck life she blamed for every insecurity she carried. She talked about becoming someone important, someone admired, someone who didn't have to shop at thrift stores or use coupons. I encouraged her dreams, always hoping she would find a place where she felt she belonged. But I didn't notice how those dreams twisted into something painful, how she began to see our past not as a chapter of her story, but as a weight she needed to cut loose. When Rachel finished high school, I gave her all the savings I'd managed to collect, money from overtime shifts, holiday cleaning jobs, and the nights I stayed awake mending clothes for neighbors. It was enough to cover a few classes at a community college. She took the envelope, thumbed through the bills, and said, "This isn't much." She didn't mean it to wound me, or maybe she did, but I felt the words land like small stones in my chest. Still, I told myself she would grow out of her resentment. I told myself she just needed time, but then, at 24, she became pregnant. She moved back home quietly, without telling me much about the father except that he wasn't around anymore. During her pregnancy, she drifted like a ghost through the house, detached, restless, always scrolling her phone as if her real life existed somewhere far away. I tried to cook her favorite meals, tried to talk to her, but she seemed unreachable. When Evan was born, everything changed, and then nothing did. I remember holding him for the first time, feeling his tiny hand curl around my finger. Rachel watched from the hospital bed, looking exhausted and unsure. I thought motherhood would draw her closer to us, but instead she treated it like a burden she didn't know how to carry. She slept through feedings, spent evenings out with friends, came home irritated when Evan cried. Without meaning to, I stepped into the role she was avoiding. I rocked him through long nights of colic, carried him on my hip while cooking dinner, learned the rhythm of his breathing when he slept. Daniel adored him too, calling him our little man, and between the two of us, Evan never lacked love. But with every moment I spent caring for him, Rachel drifted a little farther away. Looking back, I wonder if that was the first real crack between us, the moment she began to see my presence not as support, but as competition. Maybe she believed I had taken something from her. Maybe she feared Evan loved me more. Or maybe she simply needed someone to blame. Whatever the reason, that quiet distance she kept in those early years would grow into something far more painful, something neither of us were prepared to face. Rachel began to change in ways I didn't recognize around the time Evan turned 4. She'd been working at a medical office, checking in patients, filing insurance claims, and wearing clean scrubs that made her feel, in her words, like someone who had her life together. I used to watch her walk out the door in the mornings, ponytail neat, badge clipped to her pocket, and think maybe this was her turning point. Maybe motherhood would find her through work, through structure, through routine. That illusion lasted until the afternoon she introduced me to Mark. He came by to pick her up after her shift, leaning against his truck with a confidence that made the whole parking lot seem smaller. He had a solid job in logistics, steady hours, a good reputation in town. When Rachel brought him inside our house, she called Evan my little guy in this practiced, polished tone that didn't sound like her at all. Mark knelt to greet him, and Evan, sweet as always, waved shyly. I tried to ignore the way Rachel watched the moment, as if she were waiting for someone to judge how it looked. Not long after, she confessed one night that she hadn't told Mark the truth about who raised Evan. "It's not lying," she insisted. "It's presenting myself the way I want to be seen." She said it as if she were rearranging furniture, not rewriting our entire history. I told her honesty mattered. She told me honesty hadn't helped her much so far. Within a year, she and Mark were engaged. The wedding was small, held in the backyard of Mark's parents' home. I remember standing in the second row, holding Evan's hand, watching Rachel introduce herself to strangers as a single mom who had fought her way through everything. People nodded like she was a hero. I kept quiet, letting the lie sit on my tongue like something I didn't dare swallow. After the ceremony, Rachel pulled me aside. Her bouquet trembled in her hand despite her smile. "Mom," she whispered, "I need Evan to move in with us full time. It's important that Mark sees me as a capable mother. It'll help our family blend better. Please don't make this hard." I wanted to say no. Every cell in my body screamed to hold my grandson close and never let go. But I saw the desperation in her eyes, the need to be seen differently, to escape the shame she had carried since childhood. So I nodded, even though the ground felt unsteady beneath me. Evan cried the night he left our house. He clung to my shirt, fingers curled in the fabric like he used to when he was tiny and half asleep. I told him he would still see me all the time, that nothing would change. But the truth is, everything changed at once. When Mark buckled him into the back seat, Evan looked at me through the window, face streaked with tears, and I felt something inside me splinter. In the weeks that followed, Rachel made good on her promise. At first, she brought Evan by on Saturdays, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just for an hour. He ran into my arms every time as if he'd been holding his breath all week. But soon the visits grew shorter. Then they became less frequent. Then Rachel started canceling. Evan had soccer. Evan had homework. Evan had a birthday party across town. She always had a reason, and every reason chipped a little more paint off the truth. I tried calling. She didn't pick up. I texted. She replied with short messages that sounded like they were written for an audience. "We're building routines. Kids need consistency. Don't confuse him." She never said she missed me. She never asked how I was doing. It was like she had built a new life and sealed every door behind her. One evening, after another canceled visit, I logged onto Facebook just to see pictures of Evan. I told myself, what I found instead was a post from Rachel. She'd uploaded a smiling photo of herself and my grandson with the caption, "Doing it all on my own since day one." The comments praised her strength, her resilience, her independence. Someone wrote, "Your mom must be so proud," Rachel replied. She wasn't really around. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or scream or march to her house and demand she tell the truth, but I did none of those things. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat at the kitchen table with my hands resting uselessly in my lap. That night, the house felt unfamiliar, too quiet, too hollow. Daniel called to check on me and I told him I was fine. Even though it was a lie, I didn't know how to explain that I felt myself disappearing, not just from Rachel's story, but from Evan's world. A strange grief settled in my chest, not the grief of death, but the grief of being erased while still alive. And deep down, I began to fear this was only the beginning of what Rachel was willing to rewrite. The night after that Mother's Day disaster, my house didn't feel like my house at all. Evan slept on the sofa, curled up under the knitted blanket I'd made for him years ago, but even his soft breathing couldn't quiet the storm inside me. I moved around the dark living room like a ghost, replaying Rachel's words, her voice cold enough to frost the windows. I kept seeing the quilt on her floor, ignored by everyone except me and my grandson. Around midnight, Evan stirred and whispered, "Grandma, are you awake?" He pushed himself up, hair sticking in every direction, eyes still swollen from crying. "Is Mom mad because I told the truth?" he asked. I sat beside him and brushed his bangs from his forehead. "Your mom is confused," I said, because the real answer was too heavy for him. "She's trying to be someone she thinks she has to be." "Does that mean she doesn't want me?" His voice cracked, and I felt something inside my chest tighten until it hurt. "She wants you," I said, even though I wasn't sure Rachel understood what wanting meant anymore. "But I will always be here. That will never change." He fell asleep in my lap, and I held him until dawn. For the first time in years, I felt a purpose return, anchored by the weight of a child who still believed I mattered. But peace didn't last. By late morning, someone pounded on my door loud enough to rattle the windows. When I opened it, Rachel stood there with mascara smudged under her eyes and fury twisting her face. "Where is he?" she demanded before stepping inside without waiting for permission. "You think you can just keep him here and turn him against me?" Evan heard her voice and shrank behind my legs. Mark arrived seconds later, out of breath and clearly embarrassed. He apologized, but Rachel cut him off with a raised hand. "Evan, get your things," she snapped. "You're coming home." Evan didn't move. His small fingers dug into my sweater. I could feel him trembling. "Rachel, stop," Mark said, lowering his voice. "Let's talk about what happened yesterday." "What happened?" she said, turning on him. "Is that she," Rachel jabbed a finger toward me, "manipulated my son. She's been doing it for years." I wanted to yell. I wanted to finally let loose every truth I'd swallowed for a decade. But Evan was watching, and I refused to let that boy see the adults who loved him rip each other apart. "Rachel," I said quietly. "He came to his own conclusions." "Because you filled his head with lies," she shot back. Before I could respond, Mark stepped between us. "Enough," he said. "Evan deserves better than this. We need advice from someone who understands custody law. We're not making emotional decisions today." The moment he said custody, Rachel's jaw locked. She hated the implication that someone else might judge her parenting. In the end, I agreed, reluctantly, to let Evan leave with them that day. I walked him to the car, holding his hand until the very last moment. As he climbed into the back seat, he looked at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of fear and hope, like he was silently asking whether I was going to disappear again. "I'll see you soon," I promised. But when the car door shut, I knew it wouldn't be soon enough. The next days felt heavier than I could bear. I kept checking my phone, desperate for a message or photo or anything that showed Evan was okay. None came. Instead, the school called. Evan's teacher said he'd been withdrawn, quiet, easily startled. Then the school counselor reached out, explaining that, in a session, Evan said his mother had been making him practice what to say about me, things he knew weren't true. Her voice dropped to a near whisper as she added, "He said he feels caught in the middle. That's not healthy for him." Daniel came over that night, bringing takeout and concern. When I told him everything, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "Mom, this isn't just Rachel being Rachel anymore. She's hurting him. You need help. Real help." "What kind of help?" I asked, even though I already knew. "A lawyer," he said, "or someone who can point you in the right direction." The next morning, with my heart pounding like I was walking into a confession booth, I stepped into the community legal aid office downtown. The waiting room smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee. A young attorney invited me into her office, listened as I told her everything: Rachel, the lies, the quilt on the floor, Evan's shaking hands. When I finished, she folded her hands together and said, "You have grounds to request grandparent visitation. Maybe more, depending on evidence." "Evidence?" I murmured. "Proof that Evan's emotional well-being is at risk." She said gently, I left with a packet of forms and a tremor in my hands. I didn't want to fight my daughter. I didn't want to drag my family through court. But as I walked to my car, I realized this wasn't about me or about Rachel. It was about a little boy who deserved the truth and someone willing to fight for him. For the first time in a long time, I knew that someone had to be me. The morning of the hearing felt colder than the weather forecast had promised. I sat on a bench outside the courtroom with a folder resting on my lap, the edges soft from how tightly I'd been gripping it. Inside were school notes, statements, and every piece of evidence I could gather. My hands shook, not from fear of losing, but from knowing that walking into that room meant admitting my own daughter had pushed us to this point. Mark approached quietly and sat beside me. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed. After a moment, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, older phone I recognized immediately. "I found this," he said. It still had recordings on it, from back then. His voice wavered, as if he hated being the one to hand me proof of Rachel's choices. Before I could respond, the bailiff called us inside. The courtroom felt colder than the hallway. Rachel sat at the opposite table, rigid, defensive, her gaze fixed on a distant point above the judge's bench. When the proceeding began, her attorney spoke first, casting Rachel as a devoted mother worn down by my interference. He described her as someone trying to protect her child from confusion, desperately attempting to keep her family intact. His words floated through the room like smoke, thick, intentional, obscuring. Then my attorney rose. She didn't raise her voice or pace dramatically. She simply laid the timeline before the judge, my years raising Evan, the school reports, the recent turmoil. And then she pressed play. Rachel's voice spilled out, younger and unguarded. "Mom, can you keep him again tonight? I just need more time. You're basically raising him anyway." Another message followed, her tone weary. "I can't handle him crying right now. Please just take him." A third recording played. This one was almost careless, spoken as if motherhood were a coat she never meant to wear. "You're better at this. I just need space." Rachel lowered her head. Mark stared at the floor. I sat still, not triumphant, not angry, only sad that the truth had survived only because a forgotten phone had. The guardian ad litem met with Evan privately. When she returned, she summarized what he shared. He felt safe with me, torn with Rachel, and overwhelmed by expectations he didn't understand. It was enough. The judge delivered her decision with a firm clarity. She granted shared custody, with Evan spending half of each month with me. She ordered Rachel to attend parenting classes, follow therapeutic recommendations, and stop posting about our family. If she failed, the custody arrangement could be revisited. I nodded, unable to speak. Once outside, tears came, not from victory, but release. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't something I carried alone. In the months that followed, Evan settled into a new rhythm. He came to my little house with his backpack bouncing, helped me knead dough for the small bakery stall I opened at the farmer's market, and filled the rooms with noise that made the place feel alive again. Daniel visited often, repairing shelves and sharing meals. Life didn't transform overnight, but it softened around the edges. Rachel kept her distance. I heard she and Mark separated quietly, eventually, through Daniel. I learned she had started therapy. Part of me didn't believe she would change. But another part, the part that had rocked her to sleep decades ago, hoped she might. One evening, months after the hearing, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. When I answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, I know what I did. I hurt you. I hurt Evan. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it." Silence stretched between us before I managed. "He's doing well. We're okay." "I'm trying," she said. After the call ended, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Healing. I realized rarely arrives in grand declarations. Sometimes it comes as a quiet offering, unsure, imperfect, but real enough to hold on to. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we might find our way forward.